defending a lot of the Trump administration policies. I have no interest in defending his pardon policy. I think it's been pretty gross. And I think it even was, frankly, at the end of the first administration. If you look at the pardons that came out, there was a lot of coverage at that point about January 6th, and the people that were pardoned were sort of ignored in that coverage. But for an administration that I think prides itself on being tough on crime, first administration pardons are inexcusable. One of the big legislative accomplishments, in theory, was the get out of jail free legislation he passed.
Is this the First Step Act?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And
Right.
I think that now it's almost like he looked at what Biden did. I think that's what makes it difficult for Democrats to condemn it, is because of how gross Biden's pardons were. But it's almost like he saw what Biden did and said, "Hold my beer, and I'm going to show you even and go farther."
I mean, okay, interestingly, I mean, I think you would get a lot of Democrats arguing the First Step Act was actually a good thing that Trump did in his
a lot of
first term.
Democrats do argue that.
But what he is doing now is not the First Step Act. Definitely.
I think this is a larger, it's a larger pattern of Donald Trump selling out the little guy in favor of the big guy. If you don't have the resources, he'll send you to CCOT without due process. But if you have resources, you'll get out of jail for free, right? If you're a minor who works hard, he'll cut the program at HHS that takes care of minors while standing on stage and saying that he's for minors. Or he'll give a pardon to a reality TV star with resources instead of helping people who need a tax cut. This is just part of a larger trend with Donald Trump, who will always do things for the wealthy while also claiming he's for working class people, but doing absolutely nothing to back it up. As a matter of fact, undercutting them in the process.
I just think like what these people represent, though, they're all sort of a part of the Donald Trump narrative. He is pardoning reality stars who are being accused of white collar crimes. President Trump, who is the ultimate victim, namely of some white collar crimes. I mean, if he exonerates them, and it makes him look better. It changes the narrative of his story. Tax evasion, these kind of crimes that aren't always as tangible.
I don't know if they're all white collar crimes. I mean, the first big pardon group he did was pardoning the people who beat up police.
No, but I mean,
That's
these people
true.
in particular.
But they have also actually backed off of prosecuting white collar crimes.
Right.
I'm not just pardoning them. I mean, but there's that, and then there's also the MAGA of it all. The person who I was talking about who's in charge of the pardons, Ed Martin, who couldn't get confirmed as the DC attorney, now is in charge of pardons for whatever reason. He wrote on X, "No MAGA left behind," and then he thanked Trump for pardoning Sheriff Jenkins, who is also another character, sentenced to 10 years in prison for taking tens of thousands of dollars in bribes to give random people law enforcement badges that they had not earned.
Look,
this is what the MAGA thing is all about,
the First Step Act, I think, was a good thing. I think we over-sentence too much in this country for non-violent crimes. Tax evasion, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you should be able to pay a fee for that and move on. In this particular case of the sheriff, I don't know anyone who was harmed by his act. I'm not saying that the act was okay, moral, or ethical. I don't agree with it. But should he be sentenced to 10 years any more than the Chrissies or the individual in Florida? Pay your fine and move on. This isn't a Ponzi scheme. They didn't murder anyone. They didn't rob anyone necessarily.
I mean, they did.
So I
rob
view this.
people.
I view this a little differently.
I think that people would argue that when even white collar crimes is a form of cheating, and usually there are victims, there are people who are hurt by
a Ponzi
these
scheme, sure. But Abby,
but
in the
it's not
case of
just a
Florida, the
Ponzi
gentleman
scheme.
actually paid back the $10 million that he owed, and the judge actually considered that, but decided to sentence him anyway.
But okay, we always talk about deterrence in crime here,
sure.
right? Like, is there no role for deterrence in white collar crime?
Look, I think the bottom line is this, Abby, is that he rewards loyalty, and it doesn't matter. We can sit here and litigate all these cases, like where with the Chrisley family, should they have been jailed, or as long as they were, or should they have been prosecuted the way they were? We can argue this, as long as the day is long. But the ultimate thing is, if you are loyal to Donald Trump, he will repay you. And that is what we're seeing play out. And we're just at the beginning of this administration. And he's doing pardons. He's issuing pardons. Dan worked in the White House, issuing pardons far earlier than typical presidents do. I mean, you may see a couple pardons sprinkled traditionally among presidencies, but most of them come at the end because it is so politically perilous. But Donald Trump says maybe he'll run for re-election, which of course he's not allowed to do by law. But I think he's looking at this as, I'm getting payback, and I'm going to reward people who have been loyal to me no matter what.
And the Culpeper sheriff is somebody, Virginia is one of the few states that has a statewide election this year. The Democrat nominee, Abigail Spanberger, jumped on that right away, and now the Republican ticket's going to have to defend it.
I mean, I'm thinking still about what Chair Michael just said. I mean, in a way, Trump is agreeing with you that white collar crime is not really crime, and just in general. And then on top of that, if you layer praise for Trump, that's a good reason to get a pardon. what kind of message does that send in
It
this
sends that what
country?
he did was not a serious crime. He was indicted for white-collar crime. How does President Trump send that message by then pardoning anyone who has a similar crime?
But I think there's a distinct.
he's a victim.
I
That's
think
what
there's a
he's trying to
distinct
say.
difference from, again, someone who's running a Ponzi scheme versus someone who's committing tax evasion. I think someone who's committing a Ponzi scheme, they're literally harming people in real time. You should go to prison for that. But if you have the means to pay back the fine, I think we'd all agree for the most part, if it's a non-violent offense, and I'm not just talking about these individuals, I'm talking in general, should we put people in prison for non-violent offenses? I don't agree with that.
But sure, Michael, this is where Trump is defying the court of law. He's making his own decisions. He's saying, you know what, I'm going to ignore the judges, I'm going to ignore the jury, and I'm going to
Every
decide what I
president
want.
can pardon people, Adrian. You know
I
this.
understand that, but the point is he's doing it at a pace that is very
So
rapid
what?
considering where he is.
So what?
Well, so
Democrats
what?
don't like it, so what?
Yeah, but the bottom line is he's doing it in a way that is non-traditional, in a way that is, you know, his base may love it, but it's certainly not doing anything to affect the middle. And I think, again, he may not run for, I mean, he can't run for re-election. He says he may, but he's not going to be able
would you
to.
agree that we
but
should
at the end of the
put
day,
non-violent
it is
offenders in
a,
prison? Democrats typically advocate for
No,
that.
I'm not
Let me
saying.
ask-
I think
I
it
mean,
depends on what the
well,
case
I mean,
is. But that's
okay,
why
we
there's
agree
this
on
court of
that.
law. and
I'm
there's
fascinated by this
jury of
because if someone, you know, went into a store, let's call it shoplifting. Should shoplifters be then just asked to do community service, maybe pay the money back, and then let out? I mean, I literally think that's the opposite of what
mean, if it's a
Republicans
younger
have been
person,
saying
a teenager,
about
sure.
people who. You know, I mean, I don't know what their motivations are, but some people might be shoplifting food, literally, to eat.
It's upper class.
I guess I'm just saying it feels like there's a different standard for rich.
Well, there's not a different
Yes, it's
standard
upper
for
class
me.
crime.
I know where my ethos
And then
is.
everybody
so-
else, it's like
so
tough
let's
luck.
let's take your
The hammer
example,
comes down,
And,
yeah.
and there are some young kids that are impoverished and they stole something from a store. I don't want these kids' lives completely ruined by some ridiculous judge
But that is
sentencing
not
them
the
to
Trump
12
platform.
or 24 months
I guess
in
what I'm
prison.
saying is that's
That
not
Trump
the,
did
that's
that,
not the
Democrats
Trump.
That's not law and
advocated
order,
strongly for.
right?
That's not the law and order
Yeah,
platform
exactly.
that Donald Trump has been talking
It's
about.
also a process. You can elect people to get laws off the books if you want. It's not something that I think you just decide we're going to have somebody granting broad pardons at the White House.
This guy was supposed to be paying Social Security and Medicare taxes in for his employees, his nurses, his doctors, and instead bought a $2 million
Yeah,
yacht.
he's not
I'm
very
not really sure
sympathetic.
that's
Not-
something
not a
that we
good-
should let
not
skirt.
a good
And by the
guy.
way, if conservatives are supposed to be the reputation of good fiscal stewards, to let $10 million of tax evasion go by, you do that over and over again, I'm not sure that's a party that really cares about the economy and making sure that revenues are exceeding costs.